Most franchisees do not fail because they are lazy. They fail because the franchise system assumes something that isn't true, that capability arrives the day you sign the franchise agreement. Let me tell you, it doesn't. And until we address capability, the franchise gap will keep swallowing good people. Welcome back. I'm April Porter, and this show is built on one mission: never leave a franchisee behind. Last episode, we defined the franchise gap, the space between what a franchisor provides in operational training and what a franchisee actually needs in business intelligence and internal mindset shifts to build a swag business and a swag life. Today, we're going into part 2, a little bit deeper into franchisee capability. Now, I want to be clear, this episode is for franchisors and franchisees. Franchisors, if you're listening, you're getting an inside peek into the inner dialogue franchisees live with all day, every day. You're getting to look at your brand through a franchisee's eyes. And this is going to empower you to go back and say, looking at it through a franchisee's eyes, where are our gaps? What do we need to change? And who do we need to help us make the right decisions that include the franchisee perspective? More on that in the next episode, episode 3. Now, this episode is also for franchisees. And if you're a franchisee listening, you might hear yourself in this story. If you do, I want you to know that you are not broken. I think we all need to hear that from time to time. This story is one of growing into the business owner that you are meant to be. You are not alone, and you do not have to figure this out on your own. So let's get into it. Now, here's the thing franchising does not want to say out loud. Like, franchising as a whole does not talk about this. Everything in franchising is designed to be cookie cutter. The model, the brand standards, the playbook, the product or service, the systems. But every franchisee comes with a completely different set of life experiences, work experiences, expertise, trauma responses, beliefs about money, beliefs about selling, beliefs about leadership, and unconscious patterns for handling challenges and change. That is why unit level results can be all over the map inside the same brand. And that's the capability spectrum. Now, when we talk about capability, what we're really asking is, how capable are you today of executing everything required to get you to swag? And the truth is, when you first become a franchisee, you're not. I know I wasn't. I mean, the propaganda out there tells you that when you decide to invest in a franchise, instead of doing it on your own, you're investing in a business in a box. You're investing in a proven system. You're investing in a guide or an instructor that will teach you exactly how to paint by the numbers. That's the propaganda. And I very distinctly remembering hearing multiple times as I was going through the discovery process that the franchisor will teach you everything you need to know to be successful. I'll tell you what, thank goodness, because I was very aware that I did not know anything about business. Now, I have to preface this by saying I always had an entrepreneur spirit. I mean, I opened a business when I was young. I tried the Mary Kay thing, but in law school, I actually opened a wedding planning business. I had a website, an LLC, and I was getting clients, but I distinctly remember that I was nervous all the time. I was wondering if I was doing everything above board, if I'd followed all the laws and regulations, if the clients were going to be happy, or what if they wanted a refund and I'd already spent the money, right? There were so many things that I was uncertain of. And so as I became an attorney and started to do my day job, I really enjoyed that in the beginning, but you get that itch as an entrepreneur, and I started to have little side gigs. I was teaching fitness and doing another sales job for skincare, and it was just about not being able to sit still. But I think that's how all of us entrepreneurs really start out. We start out by dipping our toes into the water. We see how it feels, and then we dive in eventually, right? So once I had spent about 10 years being an attorney, I then started to look at what was next for me. And I stumbled into franchising, which we're not going to get into that today. That's in other episodes. The important thing is to know that what appealed to me about a franchise system was the fact that I felt the franchisor would fill in the gaps of what I didn't know about business. I mean, I had taught fitness, so I was very confident that I could teach kickboxing. And there was no doubt in my mind that I would be able to successfully train a lot of people. I had written training manuals for the prosecutor's office. I'd been an instructor at the Municipal Police Academy. I had talked on stages around the country training law enforcement on trial techniques and questioning witnesses, testifying at trials, and on domestic violence and sexual abuse investigation. So I had a lot of experience that I was bringing to the table in these areas. But what I really believed that what I was missing was the business side of things. But because I kept hearing, well, the franchisor will give you everything you need to be successful, and me being totally aware that what I needed was business intelligence, well, I put two and two together and thought, hey, this is perfect. Somebody's going to fill in all my gaps. And so I signed on the dotted line and I went into training. And I'll never forget this. Prior to training, I had studied the operations manual. I memorized the sales scripts. I went in prepared. And I was pretty excited to show off my skills and how ready I was. I showed up hungry. And after one of our classroom sessions with the franchisor, it was on a break. One of the other new franchisees was asking the franchisor a question. And I just happened to be walking by. And he said to that franchisee, said, you know what? You know who I want as a franchisee, and you know how I want our franchisees to show up every single day. And then he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, right here, this is who I want. If you watch what April's doing, that's exactly what I want you to be doing. It was a very proud moment for me. And so leaving our 4.5 days of corporate training, I felt pretty confident. And I went back to the build out on our first gym location, and it started to sink in that there were still a lot of things I didn't know. I mean, don't get me wrong, we learned a lot at franchisor training camp, but it was like drinking from a fire hose. I'm sure if you're a franchisee listening, you can relate that it is so much information in such a short period of time. So it took some time to digest that. And when I got back and I had a moment to breathe, I realized, okay, I still don't know how to do inventory. I don't know how to manage my books. I don't know what reports I should even be looking at. I don't know why I look at reports. I mean, people talk about reports, but okay, I could print them. I could look at them. What is it telling me? I was also very aware I didn't know how to recruit employees. And as an attorney, I know there's a lot of employment laws out there that I have to follow when I'm interviewing. I knew that there were things you can and can't say, but I didn't know what they were. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to have to look that up. And I don't know how to do a job offer. Do you do that in writing? Is that done do you just call someone up and tell them they got the job? What about benefits? Or what should I pay my employees? And on and on and on and on. I had a million questions and we were done with the training and we had exhausted everything the franchisor had to provide. Now, something you should know about me is that I am an extremely loyal person. And I also give people the benefit of the doubt. And it's probably one of my greatest assets. And it is also one of my biggest weaknesses because I will give people the benefit of the doubt and I will pour into them and try to bring them along and do everything I can do to lift up that person until they've burned a bridge with me. So I wasn't upset with my franchisor for not teaching me all these things. I was just getting an education. And I was beginning to understand where the franchisor's training ended and that I was going to have to fill in some of those gaps on my own. So luckily, I did that. I did pull from my training and experience as an attorney, and By the time we were in our third month, we were cash flow positive, which was fantastic. And I really felt like the model was working. And then we opened our second location within about 18 months. And it was when we were getting ready to open our third that, of course, I had that fateful conversation with my husband. And if you've listened to the podcast for any amount of time, you've heard this story. But one night I came home after another long day at the gym, and my husband told me he wasn't happy. And he wasn't happy because it had been about 18 months and I was still working nights and weekends, and I really wasn't paying myself a living wage at that point in time. And so our lives didn't really match that vision of swag or that vision of sanity, wealth, and gratitude that we expected business ownership to lead us to. An intense emotional reaction to the news that my husband wasn't happy, because if you're married, you never want to hear your spouse saying, hey, we need to talk. I'm not happy, right? But it wasn't just that made me so emotional. It was also the shame. I mean, on the outside, I looked like the example of success for the brand. Everyone was celebrating me. The franchisor had booked me for interviews with national magazines and TV appearances. And here I was behind the scenes, not knowing how to manage my business expenses and not knowing how to get this team of employees to start taking stuff off my plate and how to get us to grow beyond that hamster wheel feeling of just keeping our head above water. I mean, we were making money, but it was every single month that we were hustling to make the money. And I was really looking for like, hey, when does that stop? When does it start to feel like you're working smarter, not harder? And so that's when I got an executive coach. And that was an investment. And I've shared this before on the podcast as well, that luckily for me, he offered to take $500 a month until I felt I could pay him more. And then it was in our first session, I got so much out of it that I went ahead and wrote the check, not having any idea how I was going to make up the difference every single month. But I believe at the time it was about $1,600 a month investment. And of course, that was in addition to what we were paying in royalties and to what our original franchise fee was. But here's how I looked at it at the time. It cost us about $125,000 to get our first gym open. That's what I spent thinking that I was going to get all the training, all the support to fill in all of the gaps of my own weaknesses so that I could take this business to where I wanted it to be, to swag. So now that I'm looking at an additional investment of $1,600, I mean, I could dig in my heels and cross my arms and say, I'm not putting any more money into this business. That's what I paid the franchisor for, and they need to deliver. So I'm going to complain and be bitter and angry until they start to produce more training and support to fill in my gaps. Like, that was an option. I've seen franchisees do it. That is not the choice I made. Instead, what I thought about is, if I'm not willing to make an investment in myself to get over my own weaknesses and my own blocks, then I'm not honoring that initial investment of $125,000 I made. Am I going to forfeit that huge investment because I'm unwilling to spend the additional money that's actually going to make this work for the lives that we want? No, that's silly. And so even though it was painful, I made that investment, and thank God I did, because if I hadn't, I'd have no idea where I'd be today. I mean, without that executive coach, I'd probably be sitting behind a desk, being an attorney, and regretting that I never made my entrepreneurial dream work. I thank God every day that I took that leap of faith and I made that investment. And making that investment did a complete 180 on my experience as a business owner, because what I learned was that I was the problem. It was me. What I discovered in working with him, everything I was missing had actually nothing to do with the operation of the gym or the franchise model. It had to do with the way I showed up every day. It had to do with the fact that I was constantly troubleshooting and problem solving and putting out fires. And every day was filled with reacting to everything around me. And all of those reactions came with an emotional component. And that is why you always hear small business owners say business ownership is an emotional roller coaster, because the constant emotional reaction to your environment is exhausting. With one problem, it's urgency, another is scarcity, another frustration, or even elation that we closed a big deal or made a big sale. But regardless, it's still an emotional roller coaster. So, one of the early big wins after getting an executive coach was that my husband and I took the first vacation we'd had in 5 years. We went to Mexico for a long weekend. And as soon as we arrived, I took my phone and I put it in the hotel safe and locked it away. And I did that because I knew that if I didn't, I would be on my phone. I'd be checking emails. I'd be looking at social media to see if there were any customer complaints or if everything was running smoothly. I'd be checking texts to see if my team needed anything, and I wouldn't be fully present with my husband. And because of our discussion, I knew that it was imperative that I show him I was changing and I was not going to work every minute of every day moving forward. But I'll tell you, it was hard. I mean, I remember that first day we were there, I was anxious all day about what was going on in my phone and the fact that I couldn't look at it. And my mind was racing with thoughts of, oh my gosh, are they like blowing up my phone? Is everything going okay? Wonder if they need anything. And it took that withdrawal from the technology to help me relax into being on vacation, because my nervous system was addicted. And it wasn't just addicted to the phone, but it was addicted to the high level of cortisol. So it was addicted to looking for something to react to. That's something I've learned since then. When your body's addicted to cortisol, you need the environmental stimulus to spike that cortisol. So you're looking for troubleshooting, you're looking for problem solving, you're looking for an employee that is failing or maybe not quite performing the way you would so that you could jump in and take over from them. And it spikes that cortisol and that feeds that addiction. And so just allowing my body to purge that was a huge win for us. Okay, before we go any further, I want to take a quick pause. If you're a franchisor listening and you're thinking, we need to factor in capability and we need to find an even better way to support the human variable of our franchisees. Or if you're a franchisee listening and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I feel like she's reading my mind, and to figure out how to fill in my gaps and increase my capability, then I want to tell you, you should register for the Franchise Growth Formula Workshop. It is designed to increase franchisee capability. It includes the mindset shifts, the skill sets, and the execution rhythm that closes the franchise gap. So go to the show notes to grab the link and register, and then join us back here in the episode. So as I worked with my executive coach more and more, I started to not only see how I needed to change as a person, but I started to see all the business strategy that existed that I was just completely oblivious to. Because we all know the phrase, you don't know what you don't know, but it is hard to put into context. And I've devised an analogy that I think explains this transformation that has to happen for a franchisee to reach 100% capability to implement everything the franchisor is asking them to do, plus the additional business strategies that exist out there in order to get to swag. So think of franchise ownership as your first stage in your business ownership journey, and compare it to stepping into elementary school as a first grader. In your first year of being in full-time school, all day, away from your parents, where you have to make decisions and show up in a new way. Okay, that's the analogy. And so you're in the first grade and you've learned addition and subtraction. And now you've been faced with a challenge to create a sum of 5. And you're asked, how do you create 5? Well, you're going to draw upon what you know. you're going to draw upon the skills that you have just mastered. And you're going to say 2 plus 3 is 5, and 1 plus 4 is 5, and 0 plus 5 is 5. If you're somebody who thinks outside the box, or is super competitive like I was and probably am, you might say, well, 10 minus 5 is 5, and 9 minus 4 is 5, and 8 minus 3 is 5. So now the whole class is chiming in, and everybody thinks that there's infinite ways to make 5 just through subtraction. But nobody's saying 1 times 5 is 5, or 2 times 2.5 is 5, because the class doesn't know multiplication. You don't know multiplication yet, and you don't know fractions yet. You can't possibly come up with that strategy to get to 5 because it's completely outside of your base of knowledge. And that is true for all of the business intelligence that you need to apply to the franchise model in order to take you from what you're capable of today into the full capability that you possess. Because the reality is you're capable of anything if you prioritize your capability to change. And so this is what I uncovered in working with my executive coach. Now, let me tell you what happened as a result. I ended up owning 4 locations. I opened all 4 in less than 3 years. And I became the only franchisee out of 800 units who had 4 locations, consistently performing in the top 15% every single month, all 4 of them. And I did not work in the business. I had a team meeting every morning on Zoom for a total of about 5 hours a week. And then I focused on the other businesses I had created because I wasn't needed in the gym. So I created other revenue streams. And what do you think happened? Well, exactly what everyone in franchising tells people to do. Go and ask the top franchisees what they're doing. So my phone started ringing off the hook, and I found that I was doing about 5 to 7 hours of coaching every single week. And being a higher level entrepreneur, now that I had filled in my gaps, I said, I love you guys, but what I'm providing is valuable, and I have paid a lot of money to gain this knowledge. And so you're going to have to pay me. And so I started running workshops, helping people fill in these gaps. And what I discovered is that it wasn't just about leading people to the mindset shifts and giving them the knowledge that they were missing. It was about doing it in a way that allowed them to manage all of this new information while operating their business. So it had to be done in bite-sized sequential order of, hey, we're going to do this first, because if we have this in place, then it's going to make the next step easier. And then if we have the next step in place, it's going to make the third step easier. As I was teaching the workshops and as I was working with more and more franchisees, I started testing different ways to introduce the information to them. And ultimately, I found the optimal way that seemed to get people the fastest results the most reliably. And so when I sold my locations in 2020, I seriously considered getting out of franchising altogether because I just survived a pandemic as a gym owner and was a little bit burned out. But when I really looked at what mattered and I searched for what is my purpose in life and what does God want me to do? How do I make the biggest impact? How do I help people in the biggest way? Well, I looked around franchising and I saw that there was nobody filling this gap. There was no franchise specific business coach out there that was working with franchisors to be the yin to their yang. There was no one saying, hey, I'm going to take the capability side while you take the operational side, and let's get these franchisees really motoring. And what I did see was a lot of franchisees being left behind. I had heartbreaking conversations with people that were losing their 401ks, losing their life savings. Their homes were being foreclosed on. Their marriages were ending and they were going through a divorce. And I've even spoken to survivors of business owners who committed suicide. And this wasn't just heartbreaking, it was a dagger in my core value of fighting for what's right, standing up for justice, and putting a hand out to someone who is suffering either because of trauma or circumstance and saying, let's lead you into a better life. That's why I was a prosecutor. That's what fulfilled me about being a prosecutor. And that was the catalyst for what I do now. And so instead of walking away from franchising, I started my first company called Ask April Porter. And I started coaching franchisees and filling the franchise gap with that curriculum and then with executive level coaching. And in order for me to do that, I did it in small groups and it was high ticket. And I did that for several years very successfully. So many of my clients who were burned out in a single unit ultimately became very successful multi unit owners. They have had successful exits. And some are even working for me today. And while I was very proud of these results, it wasn't making a dent in the larger problem. So I knew we had to find a way to reach the franchisees who felt like they couldn't afford coaching. And they felt like they couldn't afford coaching either because they'd made so many mistakes or waited so long before trying to get outside help that they'd run out of capital, or they were in such a scarcity mindset that they just could not bring themselves to invest in anything. And so I knew we had to get over those obstacles as well as some other obstacles that traditional coaching presents. Once I had a coach, like most top performers, I'll always have a coach because there's always more to learn. But one thing I did discover in pursuing coaching is that there are a lot of specialty coaches out there. My executive coach, he was a very good, well rounded business executive coach. However, along that journey, I realized I had some real mindset blocks that I needed to dig deeper into discovering where did those come from and how do I break those habits. So I got a mindset coach. Early on, before I met my executive coach, I had a sales coach. I've also had an online business coach who taught me how to build an online business because I didn't have a franchisor to teach me that once I built Ask April Porter. So I knew we had to find a way so that franchisees didn't have to make investment after investment after investment and hop from coach to coach to coach because it takes too long for them to get the holistic support that they need in order to fill the franchise gap. And it takes too much money. And so that was one of my objectives as I looked toward scaling out what we were doing inside Ask April Porter. Another factor was how do we meet these franchisees and give them the individual support with enough frequency and consistency so that they can break their old employee habits and begin to usher in the new version of themselves. And that needed to be at least weekly, and it needed to be intensive personal attention on exactly what they needed to be working on in this moment. And then finally, one of the things we had to overcome was that feeling of I need to do everything right now. Because when you're feeling lost or when you're feeling stuck and someone comes and they present you some solutions, it's very tempting to have shiny object syndrome and want to go to every single meeting. Like, okay, I'm supposed to be working on marketing this month in my standard curriculum, but they're having a meeting on team and then they're having a meeting on technology. And so I'm going to go to all these meetings and now you're overwhelmed again. You're focused on too many things or you're unfocused because of so many things and we're not making progress. So we had to overcome all of those things in order to really help franchisees see the progress that they needed to see. And that's how we came up with Secret Sauce. So Secret Sauce is the franchisee intelligence agency. And inside Secret Sauce, we have taken that structured curriculum that I've tested and built over the years, and we've put it into missions. And that's because Secret Sauce is secret agent themed, which allows us to organize the content to make it easy and bite-sized for people to come in and manage consuming what they need to consume while also balancing all of their other responsibilities. But it also allows us to gamify that content, which helps engagement and helps reward franchisees for their efforts incrementally along the way. So every mission is objective based. And a franchisee, when they go into a mission, their first mission is going to be to identify what current business identity they're sitting in. Are they sitting in an employee identity, a manager identity, an owner identity, or what we call a freedom franchisee identity? And we have to diagnose that first because we need to know where we're at so that we can start to plan how to exit that stage and move into the next. And so in that mission, they accomplish that objective. By the end of the mission, they will have identified their identity, and then we're ready to move on to the next mission, which populates when they fill out their mission report. So we're always tracking metrics and we're always tracking progress. And that's how we can measure how it's working for a franchisee. So that solved the volume curriculum problem, but curriculum alone isn't going to get the transformation because that's only the knowledge piece of the puzzle. We also needed to have the mindset shifts and the action. So that comes with executive coaching. There's two ways that we make sure franchisees get that every single week. One is a tactical mission meeting. Now, this meeting is led by a multi-unit franchisee with a successful exit, who now is one of my coaches, a former client, and helping people navigate the missions, answering their questions as they come up against new concepts, challenging their thinking so that they're evolving from small thinking into bigger thinking, and helping people stay accountable to completing the mission on time. And then there's a second meeting every week. And that meeting is held by an expert and it is an executive coaching meeting. But instead of it being one executive coach with one specialty who doesn't really know so much about other areas of business, we've pulled in multiple executive coaches, each with a very specialized area of expertise so that franchisees can deep dive with their coaches. And then there's secret sauce specialists who are professionals that would typically charge for business specific strategy sessions, such as a CPA, human resources consultant, a business broker, a commercial lender, and a PR company that specializes in local public relations for small businesses. And so our clients have the opportunity to meet with these professionals once a quarter, and it's included in their program instead of having to pay extra for those strategy sessions. So where people would typically have to pay extra for strategy sessions with these specialists, our clients get to meet with them once a quarter and it's included in their program. Now, some other things that are included in Secret Sauce to ensure we are getting the results that we want are an online community where the franchisees can connect and support each other across brands, and then also cue our AI assistant. Because we know that while they might be going through the missions in order to learn how to elevate their business is still going to have unexpected challenges every single day. And so when they come up against a fire they have to put out, and they'd like the guidance of our experts, they can go right into Q and they can ask a question. Q is going to give them a step-by-step suggestion of how they should handle the situation and provide them the exact videos where our experts talk about a situation similar, and they can gain guidance from that as well. And so it's this holistic approach that fills the gap. And every piece of this puzzle is necessary to fill that gap. It's strategically placed because if we have random curriculum, we're learning a different thing every week that may not be what they need to learn, then they're not going to make progress. If we have one coach who's talented in everything but a master of none, then they're not getting the executive level guidance we need them to have in each area of business to really be pulled forward. If they can't connect as a community, then they feel isolated and they don't engage as well. And if we keep nickel and diming people and they need to pay for everything that is required to help their business, then they can't afford it. And so every piece of Secret Sauce is intentional to serve the franchisee in filling the gap. And that strategic approach gets results. We just had Casey share a win with us. She has been a franchisee for 3 years, grossing $7,000 a month. And after 3 months working with us, she's now making $50,000 a month. Similarly, Sabrina came to us making $25,000 a month. And with Sabrina, her idea at the time of a big win would be making $28,000 a month. We said, no, no, girl, you got to think bigger than that. And so we made a plan for her to hit $50,000 a month in 3 months, and she exceeded it at $52,000 a month. 2 months later, she was breaking her brand's monthly revenue record, hitting $72,000 a month. Adam increased his sales rate from 20% to 80% in a single sales workshop with us. He took the workshop, he went back and implemented over the next 30 days and immediately started closing 8 out of 10 people instead of 2 out of 10. So why does Secret Sauce get these results when the franchisors been working with these people for a while and hasn't been able to get them to have these shifts? Well, it's because of the exact combination of things that make up the formula to behavioral change. That formula requires a mindset shift, new knowledge, and then strategic action. And everything we've put together inside Secret Sauce presents the information in that formula. We have a mindset shift through the curriculum. Then we have new knowledge through the curriculum. We come back into the executive coaching calls to ensure that we've had a mindset shift and that we're understanding how to apply that new perspective with the new knowledge. And then they have an execution and implementation plan. Everything they do has a worksheet that's included. So franchisees are creating the implementation plan as they're going through the content. And when people follow the model, which of course is a common phrase in franchising, they get results. Now, franchisors' biggest objection is typically, well, hold on a second. I need to know what you're teaching our franchisees. I want to make sure you're not contradicting anything we're telling them. I want to make sure you're not telling them how to do business in a different way than we are. And I completely understand that perspective. We don't compete with the franchisor. We complement what the franchisor is doing. And what we're covering are things that the franchisor either doesn't or can't cover. Much of what we're covering would put the franchisor at risk of joint employer liabilities or liabilities associated with unlicensed professional advice. And so we're actually protecting the franchisor from liabilities while making sure that the franchisees get that information that otherwise would be left out of the training manual and the support the franchisor can provide. And here's another tidbit for franchisors listening. Your franchisees are already looking for additional help and support. And they're getting inundated every single day in their timeline with ads for an online guru who could teach them how to get more leads, or an influencer who knows the secret to sales, or AI this, AI that. And they're wasting a lot of time, energy, and money in purchasing those things and not getting results. But the biggest risk to you as a franchisor is that whether it's Tony Robbins or it's the person they met at the chamber who got a business coaching certificate but has never actually owned a business, the advice that most coaches are giving does not include an understanding of franchising. And so I hear franchisees tell me all the time, well, I hired a coach, but then they started telling me to do things that I can't do as a franchisee. They wanted me to change my whole website. They wanted me to run a marketing challenge that wouldn't be approved. And there's many, many more things that are at risk when a franchisee is working with someone who doesn't understand franchising. And every single one of these conversations, I see a franchisee being left behind. And that is our mission, to never leave a franchisee behind. And we find that franchisors, suppliers, and really most everyone in franchising is aligned with that mission because we are passionate about providing a true American dream and making it available to everyone. Now we have franchisors who are not only encouraging their franchisees to engage with Secret Sauce in addition to the franchisor provided training and support, but we have franchisors that are requiring it and they're making us part of their system. Franchisees in those systems will sign a franchise agreement. They will come and spend 2 weeks with us. So we're teaching them the difference between having the title of an employee and the identity of an employee and stepping into the title of a business owner, but still carrying that employee identity. So we're helping them understand the transformation they're going to have to go through to change their identity as they move through the franchisor's training, the franchisor's support, and the beginning few years of their operations. And then they go through the franchisor's onboarding, the franchisor's construction and build out process. They get their location open and they get it operating and they get a context for what business ownership life really looks like. And depending on the brand, that might take 3 to 6 months. And we work that out with the brand itself by understanding their brand and understanding the franchisee journey. But once they get over that initial contextual time, then they move right into secret sauce. And that's where it starts to relieve some of the fears and the worries and the stress that they've been carrying as they've been drinking from this fire hose and as they've been trying to implement everything that they're being taught, and it starts to fill in those gaps. Now, keep in mind that a franchisee, when they're drinking from that fire hose, it's a lot more than just what the franchisor's giving them, because they're going through a complete lifestyle change. They're going from having a steady paycheck and predictable hours to not getting paid, working more than they've ever worked in their lives. Their relationship has changed with their spouse because the spouse is going to have to pick up the slack at home while they're working so much. Their children may be saying things to them like, I wish you were home more, or why don't you tuck me in anymore, which of course is devastating to hear as a parent. They could have elderly parents as well that need time and attention, and they're feeling pulled in a million different directions. But they know, and it's constantly weighing on them in the back of their mind, that if they don't succeed in this business, then they'll lose all of that anyway. And so they're often juggling, not only learning from the franchisor, trying to figure out how to manage their time completely different way, but they're juggling guilt and they're juggling sacrifice along that journey. And if we can't help them overcome those things, then their capability does not increase and their success does not increase. And this is the missing piece in franchising, which is why we call it the franchise gap. And we would be privileged to work with any of you on filling it. If this episode helped you, join the mission to never leave a franchisee behind. Like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode, part 3 in our series. Leave a review or comment. It helps more franchisees find this show. Share this episode with a fellow franchisee who's working hard but feels stuck. And send it to your franchisor or support team if you want better unit level outcomes across the brand. And if you're ready to build capability with a real formula, join us in the Franchise Growth Formula Workshop. The link is in the show notes. I'm April Porter, and I'll see you in part 3, where we talk about the origin of the franchise gap and how to fix it at the discovery phase.